Today I'd like to go over how I edited this lighthouse picture from my Canon Powershot G9 X I shot in Chicago right off of Navy Pier. We were on a boat tour and it was just a night out with my wife, nothing fancy, no photo tour or anything like that. I left my digital SLR at home because I didn't want to lug that around while we were out on the town. So I brought my little 1-inch sensor point and shoot with, and if I got something worth editing and sharing, then great. If not, it was fun while I was out on the town. Not a wasted experience or nothing. Anyway, I edited this photo a few weeks ago, and this is what it ended up turning out like. And I shot this from my point and shoot camera. I did shoot in RAW, which is a nice benefit because I'm using DxO Photolab, and I'm going to show you guys how I got this look with this photo. It's not going to be quite exact because every time you edit a picture you do things a little bit differently, but I'm going to take the same approach and show you guys the tricks I use to bring this dull photo of Lake Michigan with the lighthouse into this vibrant sunset looking picture out on the lake. And the first thing I do with any picture I take is I make sure it's level. Even the most subtle little tilt can throw my interest in the picture off a little bit, and it might not be the case for everybody, but it's just something I notice even if it's subtle. And this one's not quite straight, and you may not notice it, but I did. So I'm going to take this horizon tool right up here, and I'm going to move these circles to where I want the horizon to be, and you see this line that connects them. And basically this tool, it tells the software that this line is what should be straight. So it's kind of saying make this straight. So if I take this little anchor and I bring this to the horizon, and I can zoom in and make sure it's exactly right where I want it to be. And I'm going to take this one and I'm going to bring that to the horizon. So what should be happening here is we're lining up this straight line to the horizon, and once we click apply, the software will correct for that angle of tilt. And you can see that it had already moved and rotated this image so that the horizon is nice and straight. But we're not done yet. You can see right here in the corner here, that's the boat, the edge of the boat that we were sitting on when we were out on the water when I captured the shot. So I'm going to go ahead and crop the boat out because we don't want to see that, and a little bit of a tighter shot does help this look a little bit nicer. And you can see there's black in the corners here created from that rotation from the horizon tool. So you can see that even though it was subtle, it did rotate this picture. Now back to the cropping, I'm going to take this corner in and I'm going to bring this in. And because this picture works so well in a rule of thirds kind of composition, I'm going to go ahead and bring this in so that the lighthouse is on that left third line. And I'm going to bring the horizon to this bottom third line. So we have a rule of thirds applied in two spots in this picture. And that's the approach I took when I created this in the first place. So I'm going to go ahead and click close. And we have a nice composition here. It's still a flat looking picture, and we're going to play with these tools over here, these correction tools in DxO Photolab. But if you're watching this and you don't use DxO, don't worry. A lot of these tools in here are similar across any raw editing tool. It's not specific to DxO. You may need to look in a different spot for some of these tools. They might be named a little bit differently, but the concepts will still be the same. So I hope that you still learn something out of this and improve your techniques, even though you might be using a different software. But if you are interested in getting into DxO, I hope this also helps get you familiar with how the software works and encourages you to try it out. If you don't own it yet, pick up a free trial and see what you think. But the first thing I'm going to do here is play with the white balance, and this is pretty neutral as it is, but the look I was going for is something a little bit more evening, sunset, dusk time frame. So I'm going to actually add a little bit of magenta here and bring the white balance a little bit cooler because I want that evening look. And that's pretty close. It's a little bit cooler, and we're going to add that warmth from that orange tones and things like that in a little bit later steps here. For right now, we're kind of getting the image prepared. And I know one thing I wanted to do here is bring more details in from these shadows over here. If you look at the side of the Lighthouse base, it's pretty dark. There's not a lot of detail over here. So under these selective tones here, I brought the shadows up to bring that back out. Another tool that I play with and experiment with, and I don't use it all the time, and it doesn't work all the time for how this affects the image, is the clear view. Now, clear view is intended to remove fog or haze from an image. It's kind of like Adobe's dehaze tool, but it can do some really interesting things to photos that don't need any dehazing. So if we turn it on, you can see it's a lot sharper, a lot more contrast, and a little bit more vibrant. And sometimes I play with the intensity on this, but for this one I like the default, so I'm going to leave that where it is. But if I go ahead and increase that, you can see it gets a lot more contrasty, more vibrant. If I take it down, it gets a little bit more flat and a little bit more how it used to look. And what's nice with DxO is you can double click a slider and it resets to the default setting. The next thing I played with is the contrast. I've increased the global contrast a little bit, and you can see the magic wand next to micro contrast. That means it's going to automatically adjust that to follow with your changes. So anytime you see this magic wand, it's an auto adjustment. And sometimes I play with the fine contrast, but I only move it just a few steps. I found that if I go any higher than single digits, it tends to look over sharpened and a little fake. So I only play with this sparingly, especially when there's a lot of detail like the waves in this photo. I also increased vibrancy, and I end up doing this in a few different spots, but I'm going to increase the global vibrancy just a little bit, maybe about a third of the way up. And you can see here we're adding a lot more color into the image where otherwise was pretty flat. So if I turn that off, you can see the red's not quite as vibrant. There's not very much orange in the lighthouse. The water's, it's still pretty blue, but it's not quite as where it was. And you'll see now with it turned on, the roof is starting to pop, the details and contrast and color in the lighthouse is starting to pop. But our water's starting to take over the image. It's starting to get so vibrant in the water that our eyes aren't drawn to the lighthouse as I intended it to be. So we're going to play with the water a little bit later and bring that down. I didn't really need to play with noise reduction here. I believe I did turn on prime noise reduction in my final edit just because I wanted this to look as clean as possible. But if you look over here in the details, I'm at ISO 125. It's not necessary. But just since we're looking at this section, I do want to point out that prime noise reduction is only available in the DxO Photolab Elite version, the more expensive version. And it's a very, very nice noise reduction tool without making things look muddy or losing detail. You're not going to see a lot of difference in this example, so I don't really have anything to show the before and after and how good this works. But it is one of the best noise reduction tools I've played with. That doesn't mean it's the best that's out there. I have played with a few different tools, and I really like the prime noise reduction in this software. In this case, I also did not play with the tone curves. Usually I apply a nice little S-curve in there for the contrast, but in this case I skipped that. I liked where it was going without it, but if that's your thing, you might want to apply a nice S-curve in here and help with the tones and contrast. Instead, Where I jumped to next was toning, and before we get too carried away here, I do want to point out that split toning, which is what we're going to play with next, is only available if you have the DxO film pack. So if you get DxO Photolab by itself, you're not going to have access to split toning. You need to get the film pack to get this option. But having the film pack gives you the split toning, and we're going to play with this next. If you don't have split toning available, then you can skip past this and find other ways to kind of replicate the same look, or take it from here into Photoshop when you're finished with it, or another editing program, and apply your own look to it. But what I did here, and then you can see the default is sepia and gold, and it does not work with this picture. It looks pretty ugly in my opinion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tone down the high tones. I'm going to choose sepia gold because it's not quite as vibrant, it's not quite as orangey, it's a little bit softer in that color. And I'm going to turn the gold into selenium, which is a little bit more of a purple hue, which kind of works with the sunset look I wanted to go for. However, it still doesn't quite work the way I want it to work. So I'm going to turn down the intensity on the highs. I'm going to go about halfway down approximately. I'm going to do the same with the lows, and I'm going to come almost halfway down with it. And I'm going to increase the split so that prioritizes one side over the other. And I might experiment and see which one I like better. And you can see if I go to the left, it's prioritizing more in the high tones, and if I go to the right, it's going more towards the low tones. And I'm going to go ahead and keep some of those low tones over there, and I'm going to stick to the right. And you can see we're getting some of the orange and purple in the horizon here. And if you like a subtle vignette, then you can come down to this Creative Vignette tool, which is only also part of the film pack. You can add a subtle vignette here. I believe I did in my final edit, so I'm going to go ahead and stick with that. But when I add a vignette, I keep it subtle, and the only reason I do add it is to draw your eye to some other object here in the shot where I think the edges might be too distracting. And there's other ways you can approach that too, different compositions, different editing techniques, but this is a quick fix for me. And that is all of the settings we do in the global adjustments in this left panel. But you can see the water still very vibrant and drawing our eye, and we don't have quite the look we're looking for throughout the Lighthouse. So we're going to come into the local adjustments next. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do 2 graduated filters. I'm going to show you how that works next. But I do want to point out that if you right click anywhere on the image while you're in the local adjustments, you're going to have a few different options here to conduct your local adjustments. You can do a control point, an auto mask, a brush, or this graduated filter, which is what we're going to select. By default, this is on control point, but since I worked with this previously with the graduated filter, it's going to remember where I left off. So I'm going to stick with the graduated filter, and I'm going to apply one to the water. And I just need to click and drag and adjust how much transition I want in this image. So I'm going to go ahead and move this, and I'm going to move my transition about here because I want the water to still be affected, but I don't want it to be very abrupt. And we are going to see that this is affecting everything in this gradient down here, in this graduated filter. So even the base of the Lighthouse is going to be affected, but the changes we're going to make aren't going to be that detrimental to the base of the Lighthouse. In fact, I thought it worked for it. The other thing I want to point out is we have 3 different categories here for editing tools in our local adjustments. We have light at the top, color, and then detail. We're going to edit in the color section, and I am going to bring down vibrancy and saturation. I'm not going to go all the way down. I want to keep some color, but I don't want it to be distracting from the rest of the picture. And if I click on local adjustments, I can see how that's affecting everything. And you can see the concrete in the base is looking a little bit more neutral versus the rest of the image too. So it's working with this base very nicely. If I come back to local adjustments and I select another graduated filter, this time for the sky, and I'll move this more into position, and I don't want it I don't want these buttons too close to each other because it makes it difficult to select one for the other if you need to go back and make changes. And I'm going to stick with the color section here, and I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to increase vibrancy and saturation until I get that vibrancy in the sky and in the lighthouse that I was looking for. And here's our final edit. And if I come to compare, you can see that's the before and that's the after. And DxO does automatically apply lens corrections to your images, and that's why you're seeing some distortion correction in this image, even though we didn't play with those tools. So you can see this is how flat and boring our picture looked before, and here's where we brought it. And if I wanted to take this further, which I didn't previously, but I could use some local adjustments to bring out more details in the side of the lighthouse base, bring out more details in the clouds, maybe warm up the front-facing side of the lighthouse, maybe play a little bit with the roof a little bit more. I mean, it's all up to how far you want to take the picture, but this is as far as I took it, and I was happy.